Good morning. It's 9 a.m. and this meeting of the Inspector General Committee is in session. At this point, I'd ask the reporter to call the roll.
State Attorney Ehrenberg, Public Defender Hewitt, Vice Chair Headley, Chair Kreidel,
Present.
Commissioner Lafredo,
Present.
Commissioner Pearman,
Present.
Commissioner Schulman.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is our semi-annual meeting to review the results of operations of the Inspector General's office. And our first order of business is to approve the minutes from the last meeting of May 12th, 2016. Committee members, you've each had an opportunity to review the minutes as published. Is there a motion and is there any discussion?
I move to accept the minutes.
Ms. Pearman has made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second goes to Ms. Schulman. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved as published. Item 5 is the report from the Inspector General, so I would call on General Carey to walk us through the presentation and enlighten us.
Well, good morning. Am I on? I'm not on yet here.
It says you're on.
Test. Test.
The switch is on.
It was working earlier.
We've got somebody coming.
That doesn't count right now, though. Test. Test.
There we
Okay,
go.
there we go. So
I didn't know there was a secret switch all the way
now we
down.
know. So this is good to know these things. So good morning, commissioners, and thank you for having me here. To start out, though, before we even get into our brief, if I will, this week we had such a historical event take place that impacts all of us that I thought I had to at least start out by saying something about this. In 1775, November 10th, the United States Marine Corps was founded by the Congress. So that's our historical event. So today is the 241st birthday of the United States Marine Corps. And so I wanted to recognize my fellow Marines. We fought in the Revolutionary War, fought from the halls of Montezuma, Spanish-American War to the shores of Tripoli, and fighting the Barbary pirates. Been in World War I, famous battle in World War I. We had a Sergeant Major Dan Daly in the terrible fighting of the trenches in a significant battle at Belleau Wood. Stood up in the midst of it all as the machine guns was coming at him and yelled back to all the Marines behind him. And he said, "Come on, you," and he gave him a name that I won't repeat. "Do you want to live forever?" They all jumped out of their fighting holes, turned the edge of the battle, and again turned a major battle in World War I. Of course, World War II, many of us know about the Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the famous battles we fought there. Korea War. In the Korean War, we had a famous general at the time, Colonel Chesty Puller, famous Marine hero of the time. The Russians came across the border and surrounded all of our American forces 10 to 1. It looked a hopeless situation. And when they came up and they reported this to Colonel Puller, he stated, they stated, "Colonel, we're surrounded on all sides, intelligence, and it looks like we're massively outnumbered." And he responded, "Good, we can attack in any direction and we'll do the right thing." And he fought his way out of the Chosin Reservoir with his Marines. Again, we've been in Vietnam, we've been in Desert Storm. I had the privilege to serve with Marines in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom in the Middle East before I retired. And so, again, very proud. 241 years, and again, that's, to me, the biggest historical event that's gone on here. We've had some others, I think, that's gone on here. Tomorrow's Veterans Day, and again, to all my fellow veterans, I wish them the best, and my thanks to them. So with all that introduction, I'll go on to my report. We're going to talk about our mission activities, budget, update on the lawsuit, and where we're going in the future. Now, our mission, I put that up, and this is a little different from what you've seen last time. And this is a result from the Chair Crydell last time when we were putting our mission up and talking about our strategic plan. You had made the comment that it might be time to relook at that. I've been here a couple years, and so within this past 6 months with the entire office, we had an offsite and we worked on relooking our strategic plan, our mission, vision, values. The shop, we all considered it was a pretty good template. What we had, we made some minor adjustments to move forward. One of the adjustments was in our mission statement. The team thought that we moved, previously it said in promoting efficiency, effectiveness, and integrity in government. And one of the things we thought, integrity should be up front, because this is one of our hallmarks of really what we were established to do. You know, we look at all three, but in priority and order, what we'd like to emphasize is promoting integrity in government. So that moved up to the first of those three in a change of that, and we made some other changes, which I'll talk about later on. And again,
Before you go
Yes, sir.
on, I'd just like for the record to note that the public defender, Carrie Howard, has just arrived.
good morning. And again, this stayed the same, and we talk about this every place we go. Insight, oversight, foresight, and that's really what we're all about. Insight in helping good people make government better. Oversight in, yes, holding government accountable for the dollars that we have to spend it appropriately. And then foresight, to make sure we're always looking ahead of where we're going and trying to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, and promote best practices. So now we're going to talk about the 4 areas of activities, starting with intake and investigations. Now, like we did last time, we compare the intake to the last 6 months. And as you can see, we've gone down intake as far as overall calls to the hotline from the previous 6 months, about 100 there. But so what does that mean? It's really hard to tell. What we look overall, we have the same calls, pretty much it's similar to the numbers, both in the calls and the complaints in a annual basis from what we had the previous year. So in the big picture, we're pretty much consistent. So that downtick in calls to the hotline, we really, just because it's that short period of time, we'll have to look at that over a longer period to see if there's any trend in that and trying to figure out what it is.
General Carey?
Sir.
And I was thinking about this when I first reviewed this earlier this week. You're making an important point relative to the fact that 6 months and 6 months are relatively short periods. And I'm wondering, without cluttering this up unnecessarily, whether we should build in for the next report a longer period for point of comparison.
So maybe compare that not just with the past 6 months, but really what's the trend? The
A
overall
trend,
average trend, or if there's
certainly a rolling 12-month period, something that doesn't become burdensome and meaningless with statistics, but rather something that would give us a sense of more than 6 and 6.
Yes. All right, thank you. I'll do that. Correspondence, relatively the same. And then we get down to the actual complaints, the subcategories of that. 63% of the complaints came in are allegations. And of those 78 complaints and allegations, it broke down into 4 correspondences were referred to our contract division, who takes that and looks at it, that has something to do with contract and procurement activities. So they do an inquiry about that and provide that back. 2 investigations, and one of them went over to the audit department that may went into our risk assessment and may or may not eventually turn into an audit activity. Now, total correspondence, again, this is historical, and it's the same as we were in the previous 6 months and what we've seen over the years since we've been here. The majority of correspondence relates to the cities that we receive. And again, now we're breaking that down even to a subcategory of complaints, and I'll be talking about of that specifically now, complaints, in the next number of slides. And again, this is consistent with what we've had over the past years. The majority of our complaints come from the citizens that are identified. And then we have, excuse me, let me go back here. The complaints from government employees and government leaders over in the far right category. And again, the anonymous complaint category, that remains, a lot of them are government employees who wish to remain anonymous for either the real or perceived idea that many of them have that there may be some retaliation or negative effects if they give their name. So we get a lot of complaints that are anonymous. Now, complaints from county departments. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about that. Whoops. There we go. On the prior slide, there you are, on that one. The municipality complaints under government,
Yes.
are those employees in a municipality, or is it the city itself?
Well,
Or
it's
both?
both. It's
Okay.
both. Sometimes we receive a complaint reported to us from management, supervisors and management, either one asking us to look into something, or 2, by requirement in our IG ordinance, if there's certain things under the ordinance, if they're required to let us know. And sometimes, again, they may be investigating themselves and we follow on their investigation. So it's both.
Okay, thank you.
Complaints within the county departments, there is no consistency. And again, minor complaints on these. If you notice in the bar charts, there's 2 to 4 complaints on each one of those departments. So there's not one department in the county that there's been a large majority of complaints. It's spread out amongst the county departments. Now, the cities remain.
Before you leave this slide, of the 4 sources of complaints or subjects of complaints, 3 of them had not appeared in the previous 6 months. Palm Trend, Community Services, and Purchasing. And I wonder, with respect to Community Services, whether that is now some aggregation that includes any of the previous categories.
I believe last time, we changed this time. Last time we put correspondences related to, I'll follow up on that. But this time, and I mentioned, last time we were reporting correspondences, and I said it's really more beneficial to report complaints, because a lot of time we get correspondences, which are just questions that are not necessarily a complaint. So I think this time we switched from the last time we were reporting correspondences, which complaints was a subcategory of in those correspondences that we received. So, but I'll follow up on that to make sure, and I'll get back with you.
So is this chart apples and oranges?
This chart, from the previous 6 months, we were reporting correspondences. This 6 months, these are complaints, allegations that came in compared to, and then we went back to and looked at the allegations that we received the previous 6 months.
Right.
So this is comparing, on this chart, apples to apples. But if you compare it to the last 6-month reporting, it would be apples to oranges. So, but it is apples to apples because we went back then, since we changed our way we're reporting this month on complaints instead of just correspondences in this category, to look at the previous 6 months to see where were the major complaints. And we didn't look at the correspondences. So where are the major complaints to compare complaints to complaints?
Okay, because, as I said, there are 3 different categories on the top for the current, and then you've got 5 in the previous 6 months that don't even appear currently. And it's just,
Correct.
there's a lack of continuity between the two.
Okay, and this is because these are, we picked what are the major departments where we received, for example, let me see, in the current 6 months, we have Palmtran. Well, the previous 6 months, we had received no complaints on Palmtran, so they would not be in that bottom category. And the same for community services. During the current 6-month reporting period, we received complaints in that department, of which we did not receive any complaints in, so 0 before.
Okay, I'm
So
just,
is that-
all I'm trying to understand is, number one, that community services, because it hadn't appeared, I think, previously at any time that I can
Correct.
recall, that it is not just a combination of other areas that were reported previously.
No, it's not.
Okay.
These are new.
Okay.
And these are new.
All right, that's what I really want to know.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The cities, again, we changed from last 6 months and before, all these 6 months reports before, we were talking about correspondences. And we had this discussion last time, and it made me start thinking, like, really correspondences, because there are some people, citizens, who copy us on every, it's not a complaint to us, but it may be a complaint to their city council, and they copy us. That would be included in our correspondence number, just because we're copied. Or a lot of times citizens will copy us just for information. I'm not complaining, but you need to know. And so that categories as a correspondence. And we thought really a better reflection for the committee is really what are the complaints. And so we've changed this time to really focusing more of our report on what are the complaints and what are the types of complaints that we're getting. So we went back and we looked at the complaints from the previous. Now, a lot of times correspondences and complaints have somewhat of a correspondence with one another. Not always, but we thought again, so we went back the previous 6 months and we looked at the complaints from the previous 6 months. So this is comparing apples to apples. And again, consistently, not only from the last 6 months, but again, from previous periods of reporting, cities who often land on top, Riviera Beach, Delray, Loxahatchee Groves, were in the previous 6 months, and they've shown up before in complaints. Now, the types of complaints that we get are fairly consistent. Employee misconduct, that is a wide range of employees not following policies, employees conducting illegal activities from a wide range of employee misconduct. Financial improprieties, and the difference between what's financial improprieties and contract improprieties. Financial improprieties has to do with money. Somebody's allegations of stealing money, inappropriately spending money. So it deals with money more than contract improprieties often deal with procedures, like sunshine violations, improper procedures in the procurement process, not following state law or county or city policies. So it's a procedure. And then we had down below falsification, misrepresentations this month. this 6-month period. Now we're going to dig in specifically to our investigations division in the work that they've done. Now, right off the bat, you see that we have the category of initiated investigations or management reviews that our division self-initiated. And if you notice, we have 1 compared to the previous 6 months, 6. Well, the reason for that is during this time, I have a staff of investigators of 5. During this past year, we had 1 of our investigators left. They got married and left state, because of spousal, worked out state, and the other one retired during this time recently, so we were kind of short on investigators, 1. Number 2, we had a number of self-initiated activities that we started, and we just needed to catch up. So these are things that we start over and above the complaints that we get in of just things through our risk assessment that we think, hey, we ought to dig around in these certain areas. So we have plenty to do with limited people, so we're trying to catch up a little bit. So that's why we only initiated 1 self-initiated investigation or management review this period. Now, and I need to talk about 2, particularly, here's another category, 1 report, and I'll talk about this 1 report compared to 4 of the preceding period. And that, there's a couple reasons for that. Number 2 is the loss of staff in the middle of investigations. And 2, this 1 report, we've got a couple other reports that are going to be coming out soon that didn't make this period. But this 1 report was a significant report that I'll talk about that took, usually investigators will assign 1 investigator per investigation. This one required 2, 3, and my personal involvement in this investigation. It was a significant investigation that took more people. There were thousands of documents to review during this, and it was a significant investigation. So that's why there's 1, but it's a more significant or impactful investigation. And 2, I want to note, and we'll talk about this for Chair Kreidel. Last time we had mentioned about acceptance of our recommendations. And you made a very astute point that if we have 100% acceptance, there may be something wrong there that, are we either making too easy recommendations or not making the hard recommendations? So this time we have an example of where we had 2 recommendations just not accepted. Okay, this is the one in the major investigation that you all received a report of, that we had complaints come in the city of West Palm Beach from citizens complaining of wrongdoing against the Director of Communication, releasing confidential and exempt information to the public, and also allegations of off-duty employment. So we investigated. And again, we initially turned this over. This is also a good example of our process. This is one where some allegations, a number of allegations that we get when we come in, we just give them to either the city or the county. If it's something to the level of, I like to use the example of a receptionist being rude. It's something that's serious, it needs to be taken action on. But sometimes when somebody's being rude, we refer that to the county or the city and say, please take action on this, and they do not need to get back with us. Then the next category is we have allegations come in, and we give it then down to the county or the municipalities, and we say, would you look into this and do an inquiry into this, provide your information back to us on it, and if it satisfies, then we do a review of that. And if it's one, they've provided the evidence that they've looked into it and they've taken appropriate action, and yes, it did happen, and we're satisfied, then we'll get back to the complainant and let them know that we did an objective, independent review of their work and where we concur. Sometimes they do an inquiry that we believe needs to be looked into more for various reasons. It was not in the depth, it didn't answer really the questions, and we need to look into more. This is a case where the city looked into this, and we, in looking at their response, we consider we need to look into this issue more. Because what we did find was that the Director of Communication did, in fact, improperly release the confidential and exempt information. The city's inquiry back to us is, well, clearly this information was released, information that should have not been released, but their response was that, to summarize it the way one person said, it was everybody's problem, but nobody's problem. And we thought, no, that somebody released this, and we needed to look on how this was done more. And we concluded that clearly the Director of Communications should have known, had the training, and there were procedures in place that he clearly did not follow and released the information improperly. We also found that he used city resources for commercial gain, failed to disclose a contract with a potential city vendor during the procurement process. We also found that same vendor who is in the process of procuring a contract. There was a city ordinance, and there was also language within the procurement documents that the vendor was bound to inform the city in writing if they had any business relationships with anybody in the city. The vendor did not reveal this information, and the individual did not reveal the information during the process of the procurement. In fact, even though you're familiar with this case, because the director came in front of you, and he told you that he did have a contract, though it was suspended, by law, that's still a contract. That's still whether it's suspended or not, it's still a contract. It's a business relationship that you're bound by their ordinance and the procurement directions to reveal that neither one of them, of the individuals, the parties, revealed to the city. As a result, the Director of Communication was provided information that the other public did not have. In fact, the Director of Communication provided input to who would be on the selection committee. And if the procurement officials would have known, they certainly, told us they would have taken different actions. They would have fenced him out and not have him so involved in this procurement process. And therefore, we did question the $3.2 million of that contract, not because that it's wasted money, or not because it's not a needed service to the city, but because procedurally did not follow the city ordinance or the contract, the procurement processes in place. Now, additionally, we discovered evidence that the director used his position to solicit business with a new city manager in the county. We referred this over to the Commission on Ethics, so you may be seeing this again. And we also referred this and other aspects of this report to the Florida Commission on Ethics and the State Attorney's Office for potential further investigation. The State Attorney's, or State Commission on Ethics has got back with us, and they told us they are doing their initial inquiry into some of the information. So it was a significant case, took up a lot of manpower. Now, we made 5 recommendations. 3 of them were accepted. 2 of them were not. 2 recommendations, one after all of this, and we had what we believed overwhelming evidence that they had a senior employee who they did not have adequate controls over, internal controls over accounting for time. And they had their policy in place for off-duty employment does not prohibit people from, again, in this case, we found coming and going during business hours using city office, city phone, city equipment for his outside employment. So we made recommendations that, hey, city, that we recommend that you look at the way you're keeping track, internal controls. And again, there are many ways for internal controls, and we're not saying that everybody should necessarily punch a clock in and out. There's all types of things, from just having a calendar, having things I do to my assistant. When I walk out the door, if I'm leaving for the day, and my assistant knows when I'm coming and going, they know where I am at all time, that I'm accounted for. So just some basic things. And also to look at their policy for off-duty employment. In the city response, in part, stated that they did not believe that changes were needed at this time, and that the city's comfortable with the controls in place. We sent back in our response to the city that we hope that, again, when the city would reconsider, and when the city council and the citizens saw the reports, that they would reconsider this. So again, there's two instances where we're not always agreed with. And again, that's as the IG's role, we make recommendations. And it's then goes to the city, the county, the government to take actions or not, and that's a matter between them and the citizenry. Contract oversight highlights. Again, during this period, we monitored 108 contracts. The value of this period of time was the $237.7 million, and we attended procurement meetings, 72 procurement meetings. The Oversight Division, they issued 3 reports and made 7 recommendations, identified some question costs and identified costs, and I'll talk about each one of those reports. The first one here, we found that the Village of Palm Springs, there's a state law, and there's very specific guidance in the state law when you go out every year to solicit your external auditor vendors to conduct their financial statement audit every year. What we found during the process that as we go out, and again, our monitoring process as we're sitting out about, we saw that they had not followed the process, and that they had delegated, they're supposed to have a committee do this within the regulations. They delegated some of this to their staff to do. We pointed it out to the city. We made some recommendations. And again, this is, in the one sense, it's a good news story in the fact that the city, as soon as we pointed this out to them, took immediate actions to correct the problem. And before the contract was actually let and begun, they voided the contract, and they did it the right way according to state law, and they amended their policies so this wouldn't happen in the future. So it's a good news story about what that division does, and our folks who are proactively looking out and about to try to find things before, again, really bad things happen, and then we got really problems. They try to cut those things off. So this is an example of what that division does. And that's Dennis Yeski's in charge of that, and Karen Mayer, who's here today, does a great job in that. And then we also found that in Palm Beach Gardens, that this was in the process of building a new clubhouse, and in the process of negotiation between with one of the vendors who received, they were in a process of somebody who was selected by the committee. Now we're in the negotiation process. We found out that they weren't recording, according to law, they're supposed to be recording these negotiation meetings. They didn't realize that they were supposed to be. They were keeping some notes from those meetings, but the law requires them to audio record those meetings. They were not. We pointed it out to them, and again, they acknowledged it, they accepted our recommendations, and they took corrective actions. Yes, ma'am.
So when something like this happens, do you make any effort to like alert other cities? Because, you know, you might think if Palm Beach Gardens didn't know they were supposed to do that, probably other cities
Yes.
Same way.
Thank you, ma'am. That's an excellent question, and we do. I've got another slide some later on. These are exactly what happens. Once we find out that, sometimes even if just one person does it, it may be a problem, or one city does it. And other times, we will start calling around and asking. This makes us think, maybe we ought to call, and we'll start calling around and ask other cities, how are you doing this? And so what we do get the word out immediately. On the first one that I had just mentioned, this one we immediately, the Palm Springs and the audit committee, we did make some calls, and we found out this was starting to happen in other places, or happening, and we put out a tips and trends. We quickly developed these real brief 1 to 2 page tips and trends that anonymizes it, doesn't point out the city, and we put that out. And I talked to, in fact, Richard Radcliffe, we talked and got that out to all the municipalities to try to prevent it. And I really want to give a commercial to Richard, really a great partner in working together to help make the cities, better and get the word out. So we definitely do that.
Before you continue, as long as we're sort of interrupted your flow, if I go back to that original lead slide, where you've got the statistics as to the number of contracts monitored, the contract value, and the procurement meetings attended, what was it for the previous 6-month period?
That is a great question, too. Let me look on this. The previous 6 months was much higher. I'm trying to think of exactly what that was. It was over $1 million. Over $1 billion. I'm sorry, over $1 billion. And what happens? I mean, there are billions and billions of dollars of contracts throughout the county, the city, the folks we overlook. At this point, what we report in this slide, those 108s contract monitored,
Right.
those are the ones we actually went out, visited, looked at, touched during this 6-month period. So there are many more than that. These just happen to be, that's a snapshot of the 6 months and the dollar of amount of those contracts of this month. So last month, last 6 months, there were some big dollar contracts that we were looking at. For example, Palm Beach Underground was a significant one. Palm Beach County Channel 25 radio station. There was a number of high dollar contracts during that time that they were doing procurement activities during that time, so we try to look so they had a higher value at that time that we were looking at. They're always on our radar, and we're moving around, but it's at that. So this is a snapshot over this 6 months of the ones we actually touch.
Right. I was just wondering why you didn't have the snapshot of the previous 6 months.
I don't know. Maybe we,
Just
so yeah, because it does. And again, that's a good idea. I'll consider, maybe if not just the 6 month, to show a trend or something again, like we're looking at the other ones, because as you know, procurement, it goes up and down. Sometimes they're going through a heavy dollar procurement period, and so it can go up dramatically and then down, but it's usually, again, around 100 or so, just for the manpower that we have of touching, because again, we try to make it round. It's like that patrolman who makes the rounds.
Right.
So it's because the snapshot of the period this month was just happened to be less than the significant amount in the previous period. Sorry. And then Solid Waste Authority, again, they're one of the 2 special districts that we also have jurisdiction over, Solid Waste Authority and Children's Services Council. During this time, we found that, and this was the first time that Solid Waste Authority was administering some grants in this special type of a grant program that they had. So it was the very first time that they had received this money and was administering this money for cleanup and beautification grant program. And again, similar to some of these other situations, under the procurement regulations, policies, they're supposed to have open meetings and designated by either the council to make these decisions or a committee to make it. Well, they delegated some of the pre-work to be done by staff. You know, so staff action rather than work that should have been done by a committee in the sunshine in the open. And again, even though they disagreed with our findings, they did change the policy, which is the bottom line. That's good. They changed the policy of the way they were administering the program to fit into what we recommend as compliance with the grant evaluation procedures.
If I may
Yes,
ask
ma'am.
a question. So when they disagree with the finding, are they disagreeing that they were supposed to comply with those rules or that
Yes.
process?
Yes, they thought that staff action, their interpretation of the law was, no, we don't think that should be an action that should go in front of a committee
Okay.
to do. We think that staff could have done that. But to err on the side of caution, they concurred that they would change their policy.
Okay, thank you.
So did I state that pretty clear, Karen? Thank you. Okay, now, again, contractor, I'm going to brag about them some more because, again, these are often folks who are out and about. They do a lot of things. The Contract Oversight Division, there's only 3, to include Dennis the head. There's 3 people in this division who does all this activity, who's going out and doing this patrol activity. Again, they're the ones who issued this tips and trend on the external auditor selection process. So they look out. Sometimes it may require issuing something. Sometimes it's calling people around. They attend meetings all the time, and there's a lot of meetings that they attend that make recommendations that head off things that never make a report because it never gets to that seriousness or to that stage. And so sometimes they're just issuing verbal guidance and people take corrective action immediately or take those recommendations. Sometimes it comes a little farther to where these are 3 instances where we issue just a correspondence, just a memorandum for the record, a letter to you, here's what we found, you made the correction in that, failure to record a score, properly, they took corrective action, failure to negotiate, to record some vendor meetings that didn't get to the level of, again, some at the level of materiality that required a report, and then one on contract amendment extensions. That was one where they were extending contracts beyond, and we recommended that they not do that because it did not give the other vendors, the opportunity to bid, because they said, well, our policy is we will extend these contracts on if the vendor will take a 10% cut. We said, okay, well, from a business perspective, that sounds very good, but if the other vendors knew at the time of the bidding, that might affect that they would get a low bid or a lower bid at the time if they would have known that, oh, I might have got an extension under these circumstances. And so there's times that we issue recommendations on issues like that. Audit highlights. Again, we issued 2 reports, made a lot of recommendations here. And I highlighted in red 25 recommendations that are accepted with a caveat that I'm going to talk about here in a minute, that it's an interesting situation. I'm going to talk about each one of those reports. Here we did a report on the county's Department of Economic Sustainability on their grants management. We found a number of issues. Fortunately, we didn't find some high dollar problems but we did identified a number of issues related to grant monitoring oversight and contract change orders, Davis-Bacon Act compliance, records management, grants fund, expenditure of funds, and certificate of insurance. So we made 23 recommendations during this process. And again, more good news that even, shortly during the process and shortly thereafter when the report was released, they've implemented 14, over half of those. So the county has been very responsive to our audit activities, and they have taken it serious usually to quickly implement the actions. So they're working on all of our actions. They've, for example, have revised their monitoring handbook and taken steps on compliance. In the county, PPM stands for policy, okay, I'm going to be tongue-tied on this, PPM. Policy and procedure manuals. Policy and procedure manuals, they've updated their internal. So they've taken actions on that. And let me see, as Donna Wisniewski led that effort with a lot of our audit team. She did a great job on that audit. The next audit, the town of Loxahatchee Groves, and we audited their contracts and vendors and fixed assets, made 22 recommendations, and again, we found some common problems that we often find in a number of times when we audit some of these things in the cities. Issues related to contract monitoring. And this was one, some compliance with the city town charter, overseeing the town manager contract. Because Loxahatchee Groves is one of the few cities in the United States that entirely contracts out their government. Their city manager, it's one contract, and the city manager is a contractor and has a company, so all services are contracted out. And again, there's nothing illegal, improper about that, but one of the things we found that if you are going to do that, just like in oversight of any contract, you need to have procedures in place to oversee the contract. So therefore, the city town council needs to be a little more involved in the oversight of the contract to ensure that you're getting the goods and services out of a contract. So we made some recommendations on that. Prompt recording of some of the meetings and the purchase cards, payment processes, asset management. Now, the minority of those recommendations were made to the town manager who runs the contract. The majority, 16 of the recommendations, because of the nature of this audit is different than any other audit that we've done in the county, were made to the town council and requires the town council's response. Usually it's the city manager who responds on behalf of the municipality. But in this case, since these 16 recommendations related to the contract of the city manager, related to the city manager who was a contract employee, we felt it not appropriate that he answer for himself and that the city council. And so because of that, and because of sunshine laws that the city council, they need to deliberate all of these in public, they could not meet and answer our initial draft based on, usually in our ordinance, we give them a period of time. They could not meet that within the normal period of time, so we've extended them out through December so they can have a few city council meetings to discuss those. They've already discussed them in one meeting, and then the next meeting, I believe that's coming up in December, their general counsel is putting together a response for them and going to put that in front of them again to put a formal response back to us. But it sounds like in most of those, in listening to their meeting, that it sounds like they're going to be concurring with most of the recommendations. Am I right, Bob and Ollie? Yes. So, in fact, Ollie Taylor led that. Audit. Again, it was a very unique audit because of the nature of the situation with the team of a number of other great folks. And Bob Bliss, the head of audit back there, worked on that. And again, that was by the nature of the city and the way they're set up was a unique audit. Now, we also did our risk management, our risk assessment to try to build up our how we're going to do our audits in this coming fiscal year. And the previous year, we set up, again, Ollie Taylor did that the previous year, led that effort for us, and this year Donna Wisniewski led it for us. And again, what we did in our risk assessment to try to determine, okay, how are we going to have the, I think 700 and some we call auditable units within the county. You know, there are so many hundreds of things that we could be auditing. Where do we focus our 8-person staff? And so we do a risk assessment, and we look at contracts, and we do surveys of employees and contractors and citizens. We review meetings. We look at things that's in the new, what things for risk that's been identified in the news media. We look at their comprehensive annual financial reports and budgets, their multi-year, their construction, their contracts, the number of things that go into that. Then we do an internal analysis, a risk analysis inside the office, and then that comes out with our actual audit plan. And that audit plan, we presented that to you all, and that's provided that to the county, the city managers, and that's now published. Prior significant year recommendations, the things that were required by the IG ordinance to note these in our annual report, and we're starting to put these now. Last 6 months, we put those to you. I had 2 last 6 months, and I'm proud to say now we have just 1, because one of those were met, were finished out by the county during this period. But we still have, which was noted last time, the city of Belle Glade, from an audit that we conducted in 2014, where they agreed to 3, a number of recommendations, but 3 of them, they had not implemented them. And again, it was asked last time, okay, what do we do outside of just noting this in our annual report? Well, we follow up again on a quarterly basis with the city municipal manager, but then in this case, when they still are not following up, we give notice and we notify the entire city council to let them know that we're still waiting on responses to it. Again, were not rejected. These were accepted recommendations that the city said were valid and that they should enact. And so the next thing we do is, again, that is to ratchet it up to the city council to let them know this is sitting out there, and hopefully that we can get some action taken on those. But again, this is democracy in action. If at that point, if the citizenry, we just continue to shine the light and to point things out, but then it becomes a time sometimes between the citizenry, the elected officials, and the people in the city are we going to take these changes into effect? Again, fortunately, this is one out of hundreds of recommendations that this office has recommended. And the vast majority, 95% around there, are accepted and are being in the process of implemented in a timely basis or implemented. So the majority of our recommendations are accepted and worked. And so this is an exception.
Excuse me, can I ask a question? And would this be on your website so that the citizenry actually know that their government is not following through in a timely manner?
Yeah, this is put in our, the direct answer is yes, but you have to look for it harder. That makes me, it's in our annual report, which goes to them. It's pointed out here, but hopefully it receives some information. And point taken, maybe I should find a way to get past city council to citizens more on these type of recommendations, so they might take that action. That's a good point taken. We'll look into that.
Because it was the
Thank you.
citizens that wanted your involvement with their government, so,
Thank you.
thanks.
Training and outreach. Okay, over the past 6 months, again, I've spoken, and again, this is mainly myself who does the speaking for the office, over 1,000 people in and out of government. We do a lot of speaking, again, to citizens out there to get the word out, to answer questions, so they'll know about our office, what we're doing, and again, try to get, and it's a two-way conversation to receive their input on what they believe their IG should be doing for them. In government, we do, as you can see, the majority of folks we've talked to in government, I personally get out, again, meet individually with city managers. I try to do that at least once a year, personally sit down individually with each city manager, with senior leaders in the government, with our county council members personally. So there's a number of 101s on there, and then there's a number of groups, everything from business groups to local civic groups of all different types that I meet with. And in government, I'll mention on the next slide, we meet with all city managers as a group every 6 months after this. The thing I will do after this, we will sanitize all of these slides, we say not to identify the individual citizens, and we turn them into lessons learned. And so for about every single audit, investigation, contract oversight report, there's at least one lesson learned, what we say, out of it. It's a tip, something to watch out for, or a best practice to do. And we do that in our next meeting with the city managers, and then we have a separate one with the county leaders. We'll have meetings in December. And so we meet and we sit and we again, make a presentation, and then we listen again. We listen to them about their feedback of how we're doing and what we should be doing from them. Again, those are some of the things we've done. Just again, there's another tips and trend that I put out. I think that was in April, which was National Fraud Awareness Month. We put out to everyone that yes, it happens here, fraud happens here, and that was on one of our cases that from the previous 6 months of where to let folks know inside our midst. You may not know it unless you're looking and have those controls in place, where we had 3 people who colluded together and over a 3-year period stole from a couple cities, I think it was over $150,000, went undetected for years until we got in looking around. So my point was, hey, it happens here, and then here are some recommendations to be on the lookout for fraud indicators. We meet. Again, Roger Stroud is here. Thanks, Roger, for the internal auditor from West Palm Beach. We meet quarterly with all the county internal auditors and IGs, and these have been very productive meetings where we share our best practices, the way we're doing things, common issues that we may be encountering. And so this has been a very productive forum that we've been participating in. I talked about the lessons learned. And again, there's been on TV on a number of these. Usually when the reports come out, I'm usually, the TV wants to make a report, which is good. That's a good way to get the word of what we're doing and the issues that we find out to the citizens. I put our webpage up there just for the fact that, we're out there on social media on our website. We're going to revise this soon and we constantly think of ways we can make it look better, to communicate more. We're on Facebook, Twitter. In the future, just a commercial ahead, we're looking at, for reports of potentially doing on every report that comes out, do a brief, maybe 1 minute, like a commercial, an audio of it to put out on YouTube, that a lot of people would rather, instead of even reading the executive summary, that they can click on the link and they can see me saying, okay, here's what we found, and here are the main findings and our recommendations that last no more than a minute on a, again, audio video type format. Fiscal year summary, okay, now we're going to just 2016, and this is, again, the benefit of getting our 6-month report to the IG committee and our annual report in sync with one another, and we weren't before. So I can report kind of some fiscal year wrap-ups and a commercial for our upcoming annual report that'll be out before, what we're pushing for is to have that out before Thanksgiving. Again, during this last year, I said before in the last 6 months that we had hired an entirely 100% of our senior staff turnover. Now they've been in place and they've been able to make their mark and settle down and having an impact over that. We had a 30% staff turnover between 2015 and 2016, and we're getting all our new members assimilated into the office. And we did we revised our new strategic plan, and in this year, we put out significant, we think, was this management guide to senior leaders in government, to city managers, and to senior leaders in the county that kind of, it's a 101 handbook about what we do and how to work together, management in the IG. Big picture for this, again, fiscal year 16. We identified $5.7 million in question cost. And again, that's the category that's incurred that's a potential violation of law, regulation, or policy, or lack of just documentation, that we're spending money and we're not documenting, we're not keeping proper accountability of how we're spending our tax dollars, or where it's not used for its intended purpose. And then we have the next category is potential savings, $314,000 of potential savings, and that's identified costs that either can be returned in the short term or avoidable costs that if they take actions on our recommendations within the next several years, that we can save money over the long time. And then we had 14 referrals that's come in through our office to law enforcement, the county, or the state commission on ethics. And I failed to recognize earlier my investigation division and the intake. We've got, first of all, Angie Rentz, who I've pointed out before, sitting right here, who, that's where it all starts. That's that big funnel. When they call, when a letter comes in, she's the one, and Cynthia Sorrell, who works for her, that where it all starts. And it takes a lot of judgment to determine where this goes, what should we be doing, and dealing with the massive amount of information. And then eventually it goes to one of the staff or the investigation division. And I've introduced Jeff Himmel before here, the head of our investigations. Leo Allen, his deputy, who they took on personally the major investigation that was up here, because the investigator who was working that case, the lead on it, she's the one who got married and left state on us. So that's another reason why it took some time, because they had to pick up where she left off and move on from that. Plus, oh, by the way, they're running a division themselves and doing management issues in addition to working and leading an investigation. Okay, reports that we put out, 15 reports over 2016, made 100 recommendations over the year. And again, back to Angie, those 900 calls and correspondences that all came through Angie during that time. Commercial, here's what our annual report's gonna look like. That's the cover. We'll be out again. What we're shooting for is before Thanksgiving. We've got that done. I don't have the rest done, but at least we've got the start here. It looks good. Budget, financing, again, just a coverage of last year's budget, $2.9 million. We've gone up in to $3 million for our fiscal year 17 budget. Again, our structure's at 40, but because of the lawsuit, we're only funded for 23 people, and we have 21 on hand. And it's again around, I think last time I was here, we were at $1.71 per citizen, what we cost, and that's not including any of the money that we save for them, but if it's just on that alone. So we've gone up 3 cents through the calculations, and it's still cheaper than a cup of coffee, particularly again if you're at Starbucks. Update on the lawsuit.
Sorry.
Yes,
I have
ma'am.
a question. If you were fully funded in terms of the 40 positions, what is it you feel you're not doing that you would then be doing?
All 3 categories. One, we need to at least double the staff of auditors. Again, I have 8 auditors, again, and that includes the manager of auditor, so I mean, we've really got 6 working, well, I don't want to say working. Bob works hard. Management works hard, but so I mean, we need to at least double the staff of auditors that we haven't touched in the county of all I mean, there's cities, again, we haven't been in, there's all types of places we have not been, so there's risk out there, there's so much to do that we need to do, so at least double the staff of auditors. We need more contract oversight. As good as those 3 folks do, again, there's billions of dollars of contracts out there that are being let, and that's so important because that office proactively stops problems from happening. So that they're not just to find problems, their work, their real meat and potatoes and things that they do for the citizens of Palm Beach County is proactively stopping problems, promoting best practices, sharing lessons learned from as they're going around. So again, they only have 3 people. We could probably almost double that. Investigators, we talked about, we have right now cases that have been sitting, investigations that we need to look at. We just have not had time with the small number of investigators to get to the investigations. And some of them are serious enough that we cannot refer back to management. But on the other hand, they're not, at least from what we see so far, they're not criminal to where we can't refer it to the state attorney's office. So there's some serious allegations that have been made in the county that just a matter of, because of time, we have not, with those few investigators, get to them. So I would almost double that staff from they have 8, I would at least probably do 4 more. So at least 4 more. So that's kind of my off the top.
Okay, good.
answer.
And just to follow up on that, is there a way of telling or reporting on what, we know the number of complaints that come in, what is not able to be, sort of what's on hold?
What's in the hopper
Yeah,
on the hold? We could report some of the things on hold. Right now we have, I think we have around 5 cases, I think, right around there that we should be looking at that, again, that are kind of on hold that we look at as we can, or we're waiting to hire. We've got a advertisement out for another investigator right now.
are those considered open investigations, or would you not say they're open yet?
Those are investigations that are in the preliminary inquiry that are right in that area that what we would usually call preliminary inquiry, that it's enough that we probably would formally, because once you formally open it, that you assign an investigator to it. And so these aren't open just simply for the fact I don't have an investigator to assign. So usually before that, you do your analysis, so it's the preliminary inquiry analysis of it, and it's sitting like, yes, we should open it, and open means assigning an investigator to get actively investigating it. So they should be open, but they're not because of manpower shortage. Yes, ma'am.
And one last on that. Do you have a number with regards to open investigations that haven't resulted yet in a report or a finding or?
Yeah, right now we have, let me think how many currently we have open. 1, 2, we have 2 open right now, I believe. We have the management inquiry and we have the 1 report that'll be released soon. So we have at least 2 currently. Is that a yes or you know? Yes. Well, again, those other ones in the other category, an investigator is not assigned. So we could categorize these other 5 to 6 as open. It depends on, but right now that active investigators are working, of which you should see reports out. You should see 2 coming out shortly. And then we have a number of cases, and then I might also, there's a number of other cases that Angie and the intake staff are working on that are inquiries and management that are, at another level that may pop out. So I'll have to do, so there's multiple cases that are open in various different levels, and I'm sure this is the same that a lot of times that investigative work for criminal investigators do also. You've got a number that are kind of in a hopper over here at various stages of the work. So overall, let me do some work and I can report on that next time, or I can get back to you also on that.
I just think it may help reflect, if the reporting is to reflect not only what you've done, but sort of what you're doing and what your workload is. It just might help shed a little more light on that.
Sure. Thank you. That's a very good recommendation. We'll do that. Yes, ma'am.
And I agree with that, to also show what the costs are going towards. And you have a budget, but you're working very hard and you don't even have, it sounds like, enough investigators to handle. So I'm wondering, the 4 investigators that you're seeking, is the issue hiring just a matter of finding the right people, or is it a funding issue, or
Funding.
both? It's funding.
It's fine. We have one opening right now for an investigator. We had an investigator who just left recently, who retired, and so we've got that one spot open right now. But really, the main problem is back to we're only funded for 23 positions, where the office initially, when it was stood up for around 20 people, the whole office, just to do the county. And then when the cities came on board, the 38 at the time municipalities, they did an analysis, my predecessor, and said, wow, to do that much, and as you see through these reports, really the more work we do is through the cities. They said it's going to at least take double that amount if we're also not only doing the county with 20 people. So the analysis was for a total of 40 people to do all the cities. The lawsuit commenced. They stopped, put a freeze on hiring until the end of the lawsuit. We were up at 23 at that time, and so they just froze us where we were in place. So until that lawsuit is resolved, we're functioning at just over half staff. And so not only half staff, but just through normal turnover every time in a small office, when an investigator or two, or leaves, then it's, starting from scratch. And again, we have things like Jeff and Leo picking up and picking on the case.
So do you expect the freeze to be lifted soon based on the lawsuit?
Yeah, that is a great commercial. I was just right here at the lawsuit. An update on that. The last thing that happened on the lawsuit was in October 4th, where oral arguments were provided to the 4th District Court of Appeals by both the county and the cities who brought the suit. Again, the cities, just to emphasize, every single time, the cities have never said that they're challenging the existence or the authority of the IG. It's all about money. It's about funding. That's what the main crux of the argument is. And so they each argued their cases before the Court of Appeals. And Calinthia Diller, my general counsel, tells me, you know how long it takes. It takes now 3 judges to get together to come up with a decision. So it could take months. It's really unknown. It took years before it got initially to the first case. So it's an unknown time when they will make their ruling. And then assuming that the county, they find in favor of the county, or somehow the funding resolution ends at that point, next year, let's say, then we'll start funding the office. So it would be at least at best case next year before we would start seeing any increase in budget and hiring, if there's no further appeals and if there's no more problems involved in that. Well, I'm talking about Calinthia Dillard. Last time I bragged about her getting the Giraffe Award in the county for leadership that she gets. During this 6-month period, I don't know what she's going to do now to top this. She was recognized as one of the top 100 black attorneys in the United States during this time. So I don't know where we go from here. So I'm worried about my job now. So she's doing so. I am so pleased to have Colinthia. She does such a great job for us. And she has just immediately came in and had an impact for the office, of which I'm going to talk about that, another commercial for things to follow. Where we're going, again, we did our strategic plan, and we published that in October and provided you a copy that outlines where we're going. We did our annual risk assessment that lays out where we're going to be doing our audits this year. And I put all these sections there because every single division, the audit division led the risk assessment, and that lists our audits. But in everything we do, back to the small size, limited resources with a lot to do, we do risk assessments on everything. We've got so much to investigate, so many things out there, so many things for contract oversight. They do a risk assessment, so we're constantly doing an assessment to see where we need to put our limited resources. Impact, and this is the final chart that I just want to leave you with. I brag a little bit about the office. Our impact beyond Palm Beach County. Colinthia, as you know, last time I talked about, she led the effort, personally led the effort statewide with all the statewide IGs and auditors and legislators to change the law during the last 6 months about IG personnel in protecting their personal information, their home addresses, their phone numbers, where their children go to school, that information now for the entire state for IGs and internal auditors is protected, just like law enforcement and judges. People who work in personnel have, if you're a city personnel manager, that information is protected. Now our state IG information is protected. Well, the association, the National Association of IGs, we informed them about this, and they asked Colinthia to write an article, and she wrote an article that went out in the National Association of IGs mailing letter, newsletter to all IGs across the country, from the local level to the federal level, because they said, hey, this is such a great idea about, could you describe in an article what you did and the steps you did to make this, because we think that this other IGs would be very interested in, if they don't have this protection, want to know that you did it and how you did it. And so she wrote an article, and it was put out, so we have an effect on the association across the United States. In fact, it's an international organization. I put down there to the bottom right that executive summary of a report. You think, well, what's that about? I received a call in the past month from the Deputy Chief Inspector for the State Office of the Chief Inspector for the state of Florida. She was on a committee for state accreditations of inspector generals, because we're accredited every so many years. They come in and look at us. And she was on a review panel for the State Accreditation Association, and she reviewed all Inspector General's investigation reports that were on their website. She took a viewing of all of them. And she called me up and she said, our report, our executive summary on our investigation is so good. She said it's better than everybody else, and she asked me if it was okay for the state to use our template to change the way they're going to do business now. And it's the Chief Inspector General. I'm sure if they're doing it, they're the chief of all the other state inspector generals. So we're having an impact on our state inspector generals, how they present information. Because again, she said it's so concise, it talks to people, and we want to use that in our office. And I said, well, of course. Furthermore, you know, I told you last time that I was elected to the board for this National Association of Inspector Generals. I'm on the Professional Certification Board, and that's a board that we have certifications for all. You can be a certified IG, a certified IG investigator, or a certified IG auditor, and they go through schooling and they get accredited by the board. And so I'm on that accreditation board. I'm on the training committee. And also, I volunteered us, and they accepted in 2019, Palm Beach County is going to be the site for the national convention of the Association of Inspector General. So we're bringing it here in 2019. So Debbie Brooks, who does a great job, she does everything, administrative, logistics, finance. I don't, it's such a list. So basically everything else she does. I hope what we joke about, that we hope this lawsuit will be over by then, that she has some people to help her do this, because you know how things go. I volunteer and other people do the work, and she does such a great job for us. So that's the final thing. That concludes my brief. I think, again, I work with a great team of individuals out here. The only person I didn't mention, Jeff Whaley, who's our IT guy, who, again, one deep. We need him so bad. He does, again, not only that, but a lot of other things in the office. I'm just so proud to work with the team of folks that I have here. Back to the Marine Corps birthday, you know, we said we're the few and the proud, and that's us here in the IG. We're few, we're proud of what we do, and we do a lot of things with a small amount of folks. So with that, is there any other questions or comments?
I don't know, we sort of addressed everything as we went along for the most part. Probably my only comment would be that, speaking for the committee, we're extraordinarily proud of what you do with what you've got to work with. And certainly you've been constrained by this lawsuit, and eventually all things manage to wander their way out of the appellate division. And when that happens, hopefully it will give you a little bit more latitude and ability and resources to extend what you're doing now and succeeding at to a greater part of the county. And do any of the other committee members have any comments you'd like to share? Ms. Howard?
Well, I would like to say something about the Palm Beach County having the National IG Convention here. I think that's wonderful, and I'm sure that you had a part in making that happen. So thank you.
Looking forward to it.
So, not that you don't have enough work to do. And I'm just throwing this out there for you to think about. I was interested in the conversation about the 1 penny sales tax, that the concern obviously in the community about it, I think from what I saw, folks were very supportive of improving our infrastructure and our schools. But there was a tone of expressed concern about how government uses funds. And so I was just thinking, as you were going through everything, if there, instead of sort of after the fact, seeing if they spent it right, if there was an appropriate role for the IG in the process, I believe, and now I'm really talking out of ignorance, there's some sort of committee the county is establishing to talk about sort of how those funds are distributed and all of that. But I just wonder if there wouldn't be an appropriate role for the Inspector General to be involved in some of that. And again, because I do think, you know, the role of your office obviously is all the work you do, but it is also sending the message to the community that we are concerned and want to do things right, and giving credibility to government, really, and government decisions. And so I'm just throwing that out there as to whether that might be something that your office would have some appropriate role in.
That's an excellent comment, and I'm kind of kicking myself in the rear for not just yesterday in my office, I had a few citizens in talking, you know, expressing, you know, two-way conversation about things to look after, and they brought this up. And I forgot, you know, they said, you know, you ought to look at this and you ought to say something at your meeting, and I didn't, because I had but.
You have me.
Yes, thank you so much. When these committees get established, we're going to seek them out, and we'd like to meet with them and let them know, hey, here's what we do. Here are some things maybe that some of our IG tips and trends about oversight type of things if you want to listen, want to take these on. So we do want to take proactive action to get with some of the committees. We wanted to let them know what we do, give them some, again, tips and trends that they may look at, offer that we are there along the way. And not only that, we have jurisdiction over all of this for the counties and the municipalities in our contract oversight division. They'll be more busy, those 3 people. So they'll be out there proactively, again, trying to look at things, procurement activities and contracts as they're moving on. So we're going to try to not only, you're right, after the fact, we're going to try to get involved right at the start, and we're going to engage our office to try to do some lessons learned, just sitting and presence, observing, and that's a lot of it too. Just being there sends major messages to it sends messages to the people on the committees and to the citizens that were there. Thank you so much.
And I hope that the county would embrace your involvement in that, because I think it would send the message to the community that they take seriously the public trust and given to them with what is going to, which is a financial burden on the residents of this community.
Sure. Thank you.
On the, if I may, on the note of jurisdiction, have you or your office reached out to, or will you be reaching out to the new city of Westlake?
Oh, that's another area that I should have put in this 6-month report. In fact, we did reach out to them. They invited me to their city council meeting, or city, I believe it is, city council meeting. I briefed them on what we do, and very positive, receptive. So we've already been working with them, briefed them. Unlike the way the Commission on Ethics ordinance is written, and this, I learned myself this first time. I guess with the Commission on Ethics, you have to commence action to obtain jurisdiction and have an MOU. The way the IG ordinance is written is that we have jurisdiction over any new city that evolve or are created. We have jurisdiction unless there's actions they have to take to not have us. So it's just the opposite of the Commission on Ethics and the way we are. So there wasn't a question. They welcomed us, and we've made some recommendation. We've given them some information. For example, right now, they're all contracted out. Their management is contracted out, so we provided them a copy of the Loxahatchee Grove audit to say there may be some lessons learned for you. So we've been in communication. Again, they're very responsive, and that's something that I missed in the report. Thank you for bringing that out.
Well, that's very good to hear. Certainly a concern, and we did discuss it at the Ethics Commission meeting about establishing that jurisdiction. So I'm happy to hear there's not been any objections from the city as to your jurisdiction and oversight. This way they can start off on a clean slate and hit the ground running on a positive note. And I wanted to personally thank you for your service as our Inspector General and your service in the Marines. The 241 years reference really struck me when we started this meeting, especially in light of this week's events. Whether people are happy or sad with the election, 241 years of the Marines being in existence puts everything in perspective, that no matter what, again, if you're not happy, we go on. If you are happy, we go on too, and we're all one. So thank you for your service, and that leads into my thanks to your staff for what you're doing now. I think I said it last time, but I want to reiterate the decrease in correspondence and complaints, to me, is positive. It shows that your office is doing a good job, that you're bringing the municipalities and county into compliance, really, that we shouldn't see an uptick in complaints. If there is, that would be more of a concern for me. So I think the decrease shows you're there, you're doing your job. There's the audit and the contract oversight divisions, which are the watchdogs, as you've put it in the past, to make sure that we're not seeing an uptick in complaints. So I think those numbers show a true success for your office. And as I said last time, that the public should sleep well at night knowing that you're there providing such oversight. And I wanted to echo the congratulations to Calinthia because I know her personally and I think she's amazing. So you are very lucky to have her as your general counsel,
Yeah.
and we are lucky as well.
Thank you.
Are there any comments? I don't see much of the public here, so I don't know if there are any comments to be made. Hearing none. Oh.
Good morning. Let me introduce myself. My name is Shannon Ramsey Chessman. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Finance for your elected clerk and comptroller, Sharon Bach. Just listening to the conversation regarding the sales tax, I did want to, if I could give you about 30 seconds to let you know that the way the organizational structure of Palm Beach County works, you do have a separately elected comptroller that is directly responsible for auditing all of the payments for Palm Beach County. So our team has already reached out to the county. We are directly involved in monitoring and ensuring that the use of the sales tax dollars are in compliance with the ordinance. We will audit every single dollar. We are working with County OFMB to separately track all of that, ensure that the contracts are in compliance with what was told to the taxpayers, has been approved by the board. So we are happy to work together with the Inspector General's office, but we will be on the ground for every single payment that goes through, literally to every penny. So please know that you're always welcome to reach out to our office if we can ever provide you any information as well. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, Mr. Lafredo?
I would just like to salute you, the quiet professionals. The OIG is doing a great job, and we appreciate it. And we may not talk about it a lot, but we appreciate it, and you're all great people. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any new business to come before the committee? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.